Here, in a sparse, rocky landscape in Jordan, a mysterious grave has been discovered. The 9,000-year-old resting place of a young girl who was buried below the floor of a house in a Stone Age settlement. The girl was buried alongside valuable, elaborate grave goods, which were most likely symbols of a great sense of love and loss.
As humans settled, the dead became part of everyday life. People increasingly related to those they had lost and to their ancestors.
The archaeologists who uncovered the remains of the 8-year-old child named her Jamila, the Beautiful. What happened all those thousands of years ago? And what does the grave reveal about life in Baja, this Neolithic settlement? The 26th of June 2018. In Baja, the year's excavations are drawing to a close, and the archaeologists are carefully recovering the final artifacts from the site. It is business as usual, until the team suddenly comes across Jamila's grave. They are amazed by their discovery.
The grave was extremely elaborate.
As are the grave goods alongside Jamila's remains.
I would say that the necklace of this child is outstanding.
It is a fascinating piece of jewelry.
It gives you goosebumps. It's incredible, even compared to ancient Petra.
The buried treasure is taken to Germany for further examination. The restoration experts Andrea Fischer and Alice Burkhardt prepare the beads so that the archaeologist Halle Al-Arashi can reconstruct the necklace. Which will then be returned to Jordan. Suddenly, the modern world is brought to a standstill by a virus. International travel largely ceases, and national borders are closed. Finally, in autumn of 2021, the experts from the Freie Universität Berlin's Ex-Oriente Scientific Association are able to return, with Jamila's restored necklace. The Stone Age artwork is to receive a special place in the new Petra Museum, near the Baja excavation site. Archaeological discoveries are only allowed to be taken out of Jordan for research purposes, but they remain the country's property. Before Jamila's necklace is mounted in the museum, the restoration experts and archaeologists make another visit to the discovery site. What will they uncover this time? Hans-Georg K. Gebel came to Baja in 1984 and has overseen the excavations ever since. Khalid, Raed, Ziad, Ali, Faisal and Mohammed are members of the Amarin tribe. Some of them have spent decades assisting with the excavations, along with their families. Many of the local Bedouins once lived in and around neighboring Petra. As tourism became increasingly important, the Jordanian government moved them into a purpose-built village, El Beida. The village is also the base camp for the Baja archaeologists. The necessary equipment is stored in one of El Beida's simple houses. The team only ever take what they really need with them, as getting to the site is extremely difficult. pickups make their way through the dusty, rocky landscape to the entrance into the deep Baja Gorge. The sparse vegetation here requires irrigation to grow. These large trees, on the other hand, grew without human interference. They mark the beginning of a gorge shaped by masses of water over thousands of years, known locally as a seek. From here, the team has to continue on foot. The luggage makes the climb even more challenging. Multiple journeys are required to transport everything to the site. Despite the difficulties, the seek remains the easiest way to access the well-hidden location. It is safe to assume that people took the same route to the settlement 9,000 years ago. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Baja was first discovered by a mountaineer. More than 30 years ago, the Austrian climber came across some Stone Age tools at the foot of one of the rock walls. Hans-Georg Kargeber learned of the discovery and set out to investigate, guided by curiosity and luck. In 1984, Geber had to navigate the gorge without equipment. These days, 3 ladders remain in place in the seek during the excavations, while the others are required at the site itself. The remote, hidden location of the Stone Age village protected the artifacts from grave robbers and from later human expansion and construction. Towards the top, the seek opens up to reveal the high plateau the archaeologists have named Baja, after the surrounding mountains. Marion Benz and Hans-Georg Kargeber find themselves in familiar surroundings, but it is the first time Andrea Fischer and Alice Burkhardt have laid eyes on the excavation site where Jamila's grave, and the beads the 2 restoration experts have now been working on for almost 2 years, were found. For thousands of years, the only visitors to this place consisted of occasional goat herders. The 9,000-year-old village was discovered during the removal of the first layer of earth. Archaeologists can only base their conclusions on materials able to survive for millennia, such as rock, horn, bone, or shell. The Jordanian archaeologist and art historian Serene Al-Shubaki uses the scientific results of her colleagues, as well as her knowledge and her imagination, to bring the village back to life. Al-Shubaki was part of the excavation team in 2018 and has developed a strong bond with the ancient site. It is the 5th time Marion Benz has visited Baja. In 2018, she and Hala Al-Arashi uncovered Jamila's grave.
For me, Baja is like winning the lottery. I was able to excavate a number of graves that told me a lot about ancient social structures. That is my specialist field. The transition from nomadic to sedentary ways of life and the resulting social changes.
In Baja, one of the oldest villages discovered to date, this transition occurred around 9,000 years ago. Along with Jericho, Ein Chazal, Basta and other places, Baja is part of the so-called megasite phenomenon along the Jordan Rift Valley, which introduced new socio-economic patterns to the area. Initial settlements were founded here around 8,000 years BC. These settlements expanded, covering areas of up to 16 hectares, then vanished again. Baja lies approximately halfway between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea, at the edge of Wadi Araba. The Dead Sea region acts as a form of natural archive for geologists and hydrologists. The strata, or layers of rock and soil, reflect the climatic conditions of the past. A warmer period began around 12,000 years ago, causing glaciers to melt and sea levels to rise. The changing climate resulted in cool, damp winters and hot summer months, ideal conditions for growing grain and legumes. These changes, along with the fertile soils, allowed previously nomadic peoples to settle in one place. Villages sprung up and then expanded. Their inhabitants farmed the land and enjoyed their newfound leisure opportunities. At the time, the landscape between Amman and Aqaba probably looked similar to the north of modern-day Jordan, where reforestation efforts are now proving successful. To date, it is not known how the people who lived on the plateau gained access to water. There is no indication that there was a spring in the vicinity. Did the villagers perhaps use the Siq as a reservoir? And what did this remote plateau look like at the time?
You know, life is changing from past until now, and now we have many things that make high temperature in the world. And before in this site, they have like water source around the site. Indicate from the tools, the lithic tools also. When you find some tools, they use it for grinding like seeds, and this is indicate that they use it for planets, and it was green.
The people of Barsha lived off farming and their livestock. They primarily grew legumes, and we have found conclusive proof that they farmed peas. Animal protein was provided by sheep and goats. We assumed that the fields stretched out towards Wadi Araba and were also located up here, towards the east of the Arabian Plateau. At the time, this marked the beginning of the vast steppes, which are now desert.
Population numbers increased rapidly. Carbohydrates were now readily available, which was not the case for hunter-gatherer societies. Women were therefore able to give birth every 2 years, rather than every 4 to 5 years. But why would people choose to settle in such a constricted area? There would have been a limited amount of land available for farming, and access to water was as problematic then as it is now.
One of the advantages of this location is that it is quite remote. In addition, once it was settled, there was little chance of territorial dispute. The people may have argued amongst themselves over land, but there was no outside threat.
Because space was limited, dwellings were built close together. Layer by layer, the workers advanced further into the past. Some of the walls reach depths of around 4 meters, which suggests the buildings had at least 2 stories. The rooms are small and have little or no daylight. The excavations confirm that they were largely used for food preparation and storage. As yet, there is no indication of any paths or lanes between the buildings.
We can say with some confidence that the settlement was very densely constructed. Wherever we dug, we uncovered walls. It is increasingly clear that the little rooms we excavated in the initial phases were too small for people to live in. We therefore assume that much of the village's life took place on the roofs and in nature.
As hunters and gatherers, small numbers of humans had spread out across vast territories. Now, hundreds lived close together. For Marion Benz, this raises a number of questions.
The people lived in houses built side by side for at least 500 years, largely without any apparent conflict. It's hard to imagine. The neighbor wasn't 500 meters or a kilometer away, but right next door. That is extremely socially challenging.
Little is known of how the people of the time organized their lives, what rules were established to protect social cohesion, and which familial constellations made use of the buildings, and how. Julia Greski of the German Archaeological Institute examines the bones found during the excavation to learn more about how the people were related to each other, their ages, and the causes of death.
The bones are very fragile. When you brush the dirt away, you can see them very clearly, but as soon as you pick them up, they fall apart. We have to reconstruct them in the laboratory and are therefore unable to obtain the results we can get from well-preserved skeletons.
Nonetheless, Greski is able to come to some initial conclusions.
This is a child's skull. It's facing in my direction. Part of it's still concealed in the earth under the wall, unfortunately. There are at least 2 people here, 1 adult, 1 child. There might be more children.
At the time, people were buried under the floors inside the buildings, rather than some distance from the village.
I think our modern burial practices would be as much of a mystery to them as theirs are to us. We try to keep our distance from death. Of course, our burial sites are not located in our houses. In fact, we try to establish them outside population centres so we can stay as far away from death as possible. Maybe this would have been considered inappropriate back then. It may even be the complete opposite of what they believed.
Jamila was also buried below the floor of a house, where she would have remained close to the living.
The upper layer was sealed and whitewashed to resemble the rest of the floor. Below that was a layer of stone chips, then intentionally shattered sandstone tiles that glitter like mother of pearl in the sunlight when they're broken. Below that was the large slab. Raising that was very exciting. We lifted it up, and all we saw was sand. So we brushed and brushed and brushed.
The team feared that the grave was empty and was close to resealing it.
And then we saw the beads. At first, we numbered each one individually. Then we began numbering groups. Eventually, we were just taking photos and making small sketches before we removed whole bundles. There were 2,500 beads in all.
2,500 beads, more than had ever been found in one place in this area. Where did they come from, and what was their purpose? In the spring of 2019, the valuable objects are sent to the Academy of Art and Design in Stuttgart, which specializes in conserving historical cultural discoveries. Alice Burkhardt is responsible for restoring each individual element of the artifact, while the archaeologist Hala Al-Arashi is tasked with reconstructing the entire piece. By evaluating traces left during the production process and in use, Al-Arashi is able to determine what purpose certain beads served. The Baja treasure is kept safely in a small back room on the 3rd floor. Alice Burkhardt knows every inch of it in incredible detail.
Initially, when the objects were collected in bags, it was impossible to determine what condition the individual beads were in. Of course, the archaeologists expressed their wish that we would produce an exhibition piece, but we had to evaluate everything first. Whether this would be possible depended on the condition of the beads and how many could actually be exhibited.
Alice Burkhardt examines every single one of the 2,500 beads, checking the deposits on the surface and carefully removing them under the microscope. Using a variety of methods, Burkhardt attempts to restore each valuable bead to as close to its original state as possible. She then uses synthetic resins to conserve the beads and prepare them for the process of reconstructing the entire piece. This treatment can be reversed if future generations of scientists have access to new technical processes and wish to re-examine the original beads. Incredibly, the restoration experts are eventually able to pass around 80% of the 9,000-year-old beads on to Hala al-Arashi.
First of all, we tried to understand the position of all these beads without saying that this is a necklace or this is a belt or diadem. We just tried to understand the relation of the beads with the bones. And we saw during the excavation that these beads were concentrated on the neck of the child. After considering the archaeological data, we started to concentrate exclusively on the beads and try to understand the initial position.
One discovery, in particular, proves useful in reconstructing the ancient jewelry.
One of the first things that we found during the excavation was the ring. As it was completely in a vertical position, so we started by excavating the edge of the ring, which was very, very fragile, and we had to go down very, very carefully. After, I think, 3 days, we finally got the entire ring, but it was fragmented, of course. And during the excavation, we found that we still have small beads stuck to these perforations. So we knew since the beginning that the ring had a very important role in this necklace.
The mother-of-pearl ring is the centerpiece of the necklace and ties it all together. The ring itself is produced from a single large shell. In order to gain a deeper understanding of the methods and abilities of the people at the time, the archaeotechnician Wolf Hein attempts to create an accurate replica of the original. This may not be a rigorously scientific experiment, but it provides some indication of what tools and techniques were used 9,000 years ago.
From the moment I heard about the Baja bead necklace, I hoped to recreate it using original Stone Age tools. First, I had to find a large shell. The outline of the ring is etched onto the shell using a burin, made by splitting a section off a piece of flint with a single, well-aimed blow. That worked. The edge here is what we will work with. This method was probably used to carve the entire ring out of the shell. You have to be very careful when drilling. You have to turn a lot and exert very little pressure, otherwise the drill bit or the shell may break.
The shell may have been somewhat exotic, but the people of Baja most likely found the raw materials for the sandstone beads on their doorstep.
They were probably produced using the same methods we've seen elsewhere. I've tried it several times. It takes a lot of patience and care. Every fifth bead or so breaks. These small stones are ground smooth.
The edges of the stones are sanded down to produce the necessary curves. The next step is particularly risky. Wolf Hein carefully uses a flint bit to drill a tiny hole through the bead.
Now the hole is completed. We could sand down each bead individually, but there is also another possibility. We can place several beads on a stick then run the entire row over the slab together.
Miteinander auf der Sandsteinplatte Rutschleiten.
By turning the stick back and forth, I can ensure that all the beads end up the same size. It's quite a fast process. The corners and edges are already gone. If I continue doing this for half an hour or an hour, then the beads will all look fairly similar. The beads were unbelievably small and intricate. The people must have been very skilled and have had sensitive hands in order to produce something so fragile.
The necklace is proof of the exceptional workmanship and the aesthetic sensibilities the early sedentary humans were capable of, and in no way conforms to familiar cliches about primitive Stone Age people. Inspired by the necklace, the team named the girl in the grave Jamila, the Beautiful.
Imagine that this importance of this child, that they took this whole masterpiece and hide it in the earth after all this work. So yes, it's it has a lot of dimensions that we are only starting to understand.
Every element of the necklace has several stories to tell about the raw materials, the production techniques, its place within the greater whole, and about the dead girl herself.
Jamila has made history by changing accepted preconceptions of the Neolithic age. The New Stone Age is often depicted as crude and simple, but the jewelry and the construction of the grave suggest that people had special skill sets and that there was a far-ranging trade network. The necklace's turquoise stones came from Sinai, while the shells were from the Red Sea. The way it was threaded suggests it was something very special.
The discovery of other delicate pieces of jewelry, including fragile pendants and apparently mass-produced rings made of red sandstone, reveals that the people of the age devoted a lot of time to producing handcrafted luxury goods. The artifacts uncovered by the archaeologists confirm that they were made in almost every single house.
Die berühmten Sandsteinringe von Baja.
The renowned Baja sandstone rings were made from coarse discs that were more or less round. They were then hollowed out by scraping a deep groove, which eventually allowed the centerpiece to be removed.
The experimental archaeologist reveals the next steps in the production process.
After the center is removed, there are two ways of working on the ring. We can either use our burin to achieve the shape we want, or we sand it down until it's the right size. The sound of sanding and grinding would have been audible to anyone approaching a Neolithic settlement from a long way away.
The fragile sandstone rings remain something of a mystery.
We don't know quite what they were used for. We assume that quantity played an important role. The more rings one had, the more prestigious one was. My theory is that they were used as coupons for trade, that objects could be exchanged for certain services or favors. Such objects may also have included shells or rings that were symbols of appreciation and helped to increase social cohesion. Interestingly, there was also a type of forgery at the time. Similar rings with the same distinctive red color were also produced using marl in nearby Basta. It was much easier and faster to work with marl than with sandstone, and the rings were then simply dyed red. These rings were produced in areas where there was no sandstone. Forgeries have been a part of life ever since humans learned to make things.
Seit der Mensch produziert, macht auch Piratenkopien.
The demand for certain goods and far-ranging trade networks came at a cost. The village's existence increasingly depended on access to raw materials and market forces. The exotic materials used to produce Jamila's necklace are just one example of the significance of valuable objects. Objects which had to be paid for somehow. A further challenge was maintaining a peaceful society in such a small space. As yet, no indications of any form of hierarchical structure have been found.
Modern studies have revealed that once a group consists of 150 people or more, it becomes very difficult to maintain control and ensure that disagreements don't escalate. Conflict management is essential.
Up to 500 people lived in Baja, a large settlement by the standards of the time. Social conflicts could have led to a rapid breakdown of the community. This is just one of the possible factors that may have caused the inhabitants of Baja to abandon their settlement forever, around 6,900 BC.
It is difficult to say whether this development was a result of collapse or simply change. Perhaps a greater differentiation set in among the later settlers. Some began to move about and return to the nomadic lifestyle, while others settled in smaller villages. Perhaps this was a better model that was both more sustainable and more socially compatible.
Much of Baja has been preserved as a result of the settlement's remote location. Jamila's grave and her necklace are the most significant artifacts found at the excavation site to date, and will now be put on display in the new Petra Museum. The country's entire history is on display here, with Baja appearing almost at the very beginning. Baja also marked the beginning of a development which changed human lives far more than industrialization did in the 19th century or digitalization is today. Cultures came and went, settlements rose and fell, people moved on, but humans never returned to their former hunter-gatherer existence. These groundbreaking developments are preserved at Jamila's burial site. Hussein al-Sababa is therefore determined to ensure that the grave is reconstructed as accurately as possible.
My part is to rebuild the cist or the grave in the museum, and this is what I am doing right now. And I think it looks good. What do you think?
In another room in the museum, Andrea Fischer, Alice Burkhardt, and Hala Al-Arashi are similarly excited to see their work finally come to fruition.
So, after all, now sind wir endlich angekommen.
The necklace was broken down to its component parts for the journey from Germany to Jordan to ensure that the ancient piece of jewelry arrived unscathed. The strings of beads are now reattached to form the necklace that, 9,000 years earlier, grieving parents had placed around the neck of their deceased daughter. Hala Al-Arashi has produced a sketch to use as a guide.
The concept they really thought before composing this necklace. It was studied, and not only in terms of beads, it was also measured and conceptualized in terms of strings and chords, and this means that other people were also involved, not only bead makers, but also probably people who were specialized in making chords or making strings.
Certain tasks were most likely performed by specialists, an early example of division of labor. How the inhabitants of Baja sourced the raw materials remains a mystery.
If you want to have exotic materials, it's better that you be in a very well-situated village where you can work your network and relationships in order to get nice, good quality of raw materials. And it's strange that they are almost hidden between the mountains. So this is weird when you see the environment, when you see the village, when you see the location.
Despite the remote nature of the village, Baja's inhabitants had close ties to their surroundings. It is impossible to say just how extensive this network was, but the people were certainly part of the wider world. While the experts in the museum are hard at work rebuilding Jamila's necklace, excavations continue on the plateau. Marion Benz discovers a slab from a grave. Is history repeating itself? Once again, a burial site is found just as excavations draw to a close, but Hans-Georg Karl-Geber has his doubts.
After clearing the entire area, I now have a different idea. It's possible that the slab is simply lying on the floor and that there isn't actually a grave at all.
I'm not sure. The plaster and the layer of ash would suggest that it is a grave, but I can't be 100% sure. I would brush away some more of the dirt and then use the scraper to uncover more.
Maybe lift it slightly.
And then check if there is anything underneath or not.
There's a 90% chance of it being a grave with lots of bones.
You're very optimistic. It sounds different here than it does here. Can you hear it?
There might just be a hole in one place.
That's true. I'm under it now.
It's loose. Pull it out horizontally, as we don't know where the fracture is.
Now it's more damaged than before. Careful. Oh dear, lots of puzzle pieces.
Fortunately, we have some restorers along.
Precisely.
The slab has been removed, and the tension mounts.
There are some larger stones here.
Once again, Marion has to work quickly, as the excavation is about to finish for the year. Evening falls and work stops for the day. Baja has a welcoming, mystical atmosphere, despite its remote location and the hard work of the excavations. The archaeological team has been rewarded for its years of perseverance with the discovery of Jamila and her necklace. At the Petra Museum, Hala Al-Arashi, Andrea Fischer and Alice Burkhardt are also about to be rewarded. Jamila's necklace has been completed and is ready to be exhibited.
Finally, we finally found the appropriate place for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it should be. It looks good.
We have it here. It's not only on papers, we have it really in the museum, so it's really great.
On the Baja Plateau, the last day of excavation has begun.
I removed the layer of plaster, but there's nothing but sand underneath.
That's a shame. I thought there'd be more.
Nothing has been found below the stone slab, but Julia Gretzky has discovered and laid bare a child's skull in another room. A second skull remains stuck in the earth. Despite the time pressure, Gretzky hopes she can extract it in one piece.
Marion, Hans-Georg, look what I found.
What is it?
The child's skull was here, and here's the cervical spine and the ribs in situ. The upper arm is precisely where it should be, and there's a beautiful necklace around the neck.
A bead necklace.
Yeah, with long beads and a beautiful red and green stone.
You're fantastic.
And at the last possible moment, Hala has to see this.
The situation is reminiscent of 2018. Back then, Hala Al-Arashi had to stop what she was doing in order to retrieve Jamila's sensational necklace. Now, in 2021, the same thing happens again. Julia Greski, who discovered the grave, has to catch her flight, and Hala Al-Arashi assumes responsibility for retrieving the jewelry. It is as though the ancient graves of Baja are telling the team, make sure you come back. There is still much to discover. Hala Al-Arashi has collected the beads and numbered them. She will remain in El Beida for a time in order to examine the artifact piece by piece. What will this discovery reveal about human existence 9,000 years ago? In recent decades, Baja has provided a wealth of information that has changed accepted wisdom about the people of the Neolithic age. Our distant ancestors were able to spend time engaged in creative, aesthetic, and decorative pursuits because of an abundance of food. Baja has fundamentally altered our understanding of the past. Yet so much about the ancient settlement still remains a mystery. For now.